Phillip Greisen. Did I say that
That's
right?
right. That is right.
What
You
what is
said it
this?
right.
What is the story behind your name, Phillip?
Oh, okay. So Danish and German descent, and it looks like Greason, but the Germans pronounce it Greisen.
Greisen. Kind of
Yeah,
like a Spanish roll on the R. I got you.
that's right.
All right. Well, I wanted to bring you on today because you have an incredible structure in what you do. You coach and train and teach people all about leadership and organizations all around the world. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and just kind of put a shameless plug on what you do?
Sure. So I stumbled into leadership through my parents started a company that was focused on improving safety performance 20 years ago, and it was a blessing for me. I started learning about OSHA compliance and all the rules that people had to follow, but at the same time, we had a contract with the Navy, and we were hired to do culture assessments of their organizational culture, and it was the most educational opportunity. My job was to take employees in a private room and ask them, what do you really think about safety on the job? And I would also take middle managers in a private room and ask them the same question, and upper management. And all three of those layers saw safety performance very differently. And that's when I started really seeing that influences on behavior are very misunderstood. People don't seem to really understand how our brains work. There's layers to how our brain works and how we respond to rules given to us. And it was the most educational thing that ever happened to me. And so 20 years later, we perform a lot of culture assessments all over North America,
Yeah.
and I do a lot of training on leadership and coaching techniques.
Okay, for those of us, for people in my audience, a lot of real estate people and business entrepreneurs, what is a culture assessment? Just for some people that do not understand what that is.
Sure. Vision is usually a slogan on a sign. It points to a direction where you want to go. Culture is what you see all around you. Um, Whenever people are unsure of the proper behavior, they look around to what everyone else is doing, and that is the culture. Chick-fil-A is probably a great example. Your experience at Chick-fil-A is very different than any other fast food restaurant because they have a culture that is stronger on influencing their people than any one store manager ever could. You always have a predictable experience there. That's what culture is. It's the organizational truths to any company, regardless of any written policy. And so we assess those truths, those unwritten beliefs that really guide how we perform our work.
Hmm. That's yeah, dude, that's really really cool. So let me ask you this: could somebody with a small company with like 4 employees, like I have, could we have culture?
Everybody has a culture.
Right.
They already do. What they tend to have is either intentional or unintentional. That's a call I get a lot. Is someone calls and says that we have all the regulatory compliance handled, but what we want to have is a safety culture. And I usually tell people we already have one. I think what you really want is an intentional one versus unintentional. So yes, you can. Anybody can have a culture, but an intentional culture is an everyday battle of hard work.
Right, right. Well, Phillip Greisen, you are the host of the Leader Think podcast,
Yeah.
and I've listened to several episodes, and I do want to say that it's really, really good. So
Thank you.
I want to thank you for releasing that out to the world. Um,
Same to you.
yeah, dude, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've looked on your website. I see that you have some upcoming leadership training later on in
Mhm.
the year.
That's right.
I want to ask you about that here in a second, but um, first and foremost, what a brilliant name! Where did you come up with the name Leader Think for your podcast and for your leadership training, development, and culture assessment business?
Part of that is searching for available domain names, and but one thing I've noticed is 20 years ago, in our culture assessments, I remember us at the time, behavioral reinforcement was a pretty popular buzz phrase on understanding influences on behavior and how to reinforce the behaviors that you want to see. And BBS was the acronym they used at the time. And I remember 20 years ago, we would talk about how BBS is great science as long as you have the leadership to support it. Today, human performance and understanding human error, how your microwave is designed, how your automobile is designed, anything designed to prevent a human making an error is great science today. But we find ourselves saying the same thing, that human error is great science as long as you have the leadership to support it, which led to managers, supervisors. If we're coaching people, we need to think about leadership concepts on a regular basis. And that's what led to Leader Think. And I did end up having to buy the domain name. Somebody else already had it.
Oh, same thing
Yeah,
with me. REI
yeah.
Society had a gentleman in Florida that owned a like some kind of fishing gear company, and had apparel. He had a really nice store with apparel, and he had this domain. I'm like,
Right.
man, I want to create a society for real estate investors and business professionals and things like that. And I had to convince this gentleman to sell the domain to me for $1,000. So I've been there.
Yeah, that's
and then
right.
and then I bought my other one before that, Rise Above the Ashes. But
Right.
why don't you give us a little bit of some of your techniques and tactics that you use helping people establish brands and starting businesses and just becoming an entrepreneur as a beginner entrepreneur. And then also let's flip that coin on the opposite end of the spectrum and say, hey, what could you push towards somebody that's an experienced entrepreneur? So just throw out something that you feel like could really help the audience.
Sure. So for creating your own business or becoming an entrepreneur, I think the number one thing is accepting failure as your teacher. Starting before you are ready. A lot of people want to wait and perfect what they're going to do when they're going to be an A. And unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. You should aim for B minus work. And the reason I say that is because if you aim for B minus work, you will begin. If you wait till you're an A, you won't ever start. But when you achieve B minus work, you experience failure, but that teaches you how to become an A. So you always have to start before you're ready. Um, the other thing I learned a long time ago is being an entrepreneur is 100% about serving others. It's about what the client wants, not what you want. A lot of people try to convince their clients, here's what you need. And then they struggle when the client doesn't buy into what they're selling. You need to sell something that is perceived valuable to your client. So the first step is understanding what their needs are, even if you disagree with them. Sometimes they think they want something that they don't really need, that won't really help them. And you have to let them experience a little failure to see why they want to try something different, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Well, let me know. Let me ask you this question: how do you feel about unrealistic expectations? People that own businesses, they, talking about kind of what you're talking about here. People set up before they're trying to hit this big goal, and somehow, some way, they don't get there, and then they just beat themselves up. It could be a
Mm.
large company, it could be an independent contractor, a small enterprise, whatever. But they set unrealistic expectations and they're setting themselves up. Do you feel like they're setting themselves up from failure right out the get go? Just talk to me a little bit about unrealistic expectations.
I want to start with that about how our brain works.
Hmm.
Um, I'd say 98% of the American population is unaware of layers to your brain.
Hmm.
And we have the limbic brain, we have the prefrontal cortex, and a lot of that disappointment and failure comes from the limbic brain. So if I gave an example of that, if I'm riding down the road and somebody cuts me off, I might give them the number one, right?
Hmm.
Um, but that's a response from my limbic brain. That's a primal caveman type response. deeper than that is a prefrontal cortex that might process later on, hey, that guy was probably distracted. He might have a lot going on in his personal life, and he had no intent of cutting me off. It was just an accident that happened. So there's those two layers to our brain. Some people identify with that limbic brain that flipped the guy off,
Hmm.
but that is the least enlightened part of any human being. And so anytime you see it a lot in politics where people emotionally react, and the same thing could be happen if I started my own business and I had great expectations and suddenly I have an emotional outburst that I didn't achieve the goal I wanted. That's coming from the most primal caveman part of your brain. The enlightened Einstein prefrontal cortex can stand behind that and see that, oh, this was just a step along the way. That failure was teaching me something if I'm willing to learn it.
Mm.
So um, I don't even look at failure as a bad thing. It's always teaching me something. Failure is my friend. It's a gift from God.
Mm.
If I try a goal and I fail at it, I always learn something from it. I'll give you one. When the pandemic happened, I wanted to, my first goal was to develop this week long pre recorded online course. And it was a ridiculous amount of hard work.
Right.
And I modified my goal to developing a 1 hour course because I'd learned through failure. I learned how hard it was to actually develop something like that.
Mm.
It's real easy to bounce off the dynamics of a live course. To do something pre-recorded, you don't have that dynamic to work with. But that failure was just a teacher for me. I made a lot of content and I'm just going to modify that content to develop a different kind of product.
Mm.
Failure is good.
Right, right. Speaking of that, how is the current crisis shifting your business strategy right now?
It's okay. So, one, we do a lot of live training, and that was the first thing to be completely shut down.
Mm.
So we had to modify. It was either we're going to flow with the new normal or we're going to fail. And so we've started modifying through what you and I are doing right now, Zoom. And we've got a few courses set up over the next couple months that will all be performed through Zoom. And so that's the world's always changing. There was probably a time when people balked at the cell phone or the PC in general and didn't want to adapt to the new normal. I don't think at the end of this pandemic that we're going to revert to the old normal. I think that whatever is on the other side of this pandemic will be a new version of normal. And
Right.
so you're either going to adapt and embrace that new normal or you're going to fail. The world's always changing.
Well, it definitely did in 2007 to 2008, after the last crisis that we are all aware of. How did that
That's right.
actually? Speaking of that, how did that last crisis affect your business back in 2007 to 2008?
That ties into something you asked me earlier about having goals. That was 7 years into the business for me, and so I had worked myself up to a point where I was doing the type of work I wanted to do. And when
What was
2007,
that? What was that?
the, I was focusing a lot more on higher level concepts of training, leadership, and coaching and culture work. And I had to revert back to a primary focus on OSHA compliance at the time.
Mm.
So there were jobs like writing safety programs that prior to 2007, like 2006, I was telling myself I'm not going to do that kind of work anymore. I'm not going to do a safety audit anymore. But when 2007 hit, people were focused more on survival. They had to comply with the law, but lofty goals like developing culture were losing steam. And so, again, you have to sell your client what your client needs, not what you want to do. And so I shifted back to satisfying the needs of the clients versus my own personal goals.
Mm.
And probably the other great lesson of 2007 is have a 3 month pad at least in your business because you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And that helped today because today we were prepared. Although it sucks to have less income stream, we're ready for it,
Correct.
and it will happen again.
Oh yeah, yeah, I agree. Um, I want to say I read that you are John Maxwell certified, right? Is that correct?
That's right.
Tell me
That's
a little
right.
bit about that. What all have you learned through his programs?
So I was first introduced to John Maxwell. Just if you go to Amazon and you type in leadership and you're in the book section, he's going to come up. A lot of people think of him as the most popular leadership guru on planet Earth. He has taught leadership in every country recognized by the United Nations. His lofty goal today is beyond transforming people. He wants to transform an entire country before he dies.
Mm.
And so I started by reading some of his books. The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership was the first book I read. And I really liked his writing style. He's an ex-preacher, and being a person of faith, I related to the spiritual side he included with leadership. And so I went through his program, which was some online training combined with a live conference. And it was a great experience because there was 3,000 people in the room, and all of them were committed to their own personal growth. And a lot of times when you look at the world, a lot of people are not really into constantly growing themselves. But to be in a room of 3,000 people that all feel that way gave great hope for our entire world. We can get better. We can evolve.
Right. Man, so knowing that you went through all of his training and things like that, I've got a few questions for you.
Sure.
First one, since you're a public, I've wrote these down. Since you're a public speaker, how do you deal with problematic or disagreeable students and personalities?
Yeah. Okay. So, number one, when you put yourself out into the world, and you could apply this to your own clients who are developing a social media presence or anything like that, whenever you put yourself out into the world, you should expect to be judged. Judging others is a normal experience, right? Everybody does it. And I do it. I do it. I understand why I do it, what part of my brain's at work when I do it. Being judged is normal. And they're also the loudest voices in the room, whether you're teaching a class or you have an online presence. If you think about it, there's probably a lot of people that like what you say, and they might give you a simple like. But if somebody doesn't like what you say, they're going to leave a comment, right? And they're going to tell you what they think. But when people judge you, what they really are is confused admirers. Because if I didn't care about what you were saying, I wouldn't take the time to make a comment. So when someone judges you, what you're really doing is you're saying something that triggered an emotional response in them. They're paying you attention. And so if you look at the person judging you, instead of defending yourself that, oh no, here's why I'm right and you're wrong. Instead of doing that, you should say, thank you for giving me so much of your attention. I realize that you actually buy into what I'm saying. You're just confused about it. And your brain hasn't processed it yet.
Do you actually
Does that
say
make
that?
sense?
It does. Do you say that verbatim to them sometimes?
No, sometimes I do, and doesn't always work. But in the classroom, in the classroom, and this goes with whether it's a social media presence or teaching to a group. You should over focus on your super fans and ignore the crap out of the resistors. And what I mean by that is there's this human nature when someone's arguing with you to prove yourself right. And you should do the opposite. You should ignore the crap out of them. Because what happens is if somebody's arguing with you that you're wrong, then you're feeding that argument by giving it attention. And it actually grows. And sometimes I had an experience one time where failure, my teacher, I gave a resistor who was very resistant to commonly accepted science. I gave him a lot of attention trying to convince him that the science was right. And I remember at the end of the class, he came up to me and he said, I realized throughout the week that you were finally coming around to my way of thinking. He thought that he was changing me by me trying to change him. And it blew my mind, but I realized I did it wrong. The same class, I had a guy who is what I call a super fan, somebody who really buys into your philosophy, your way of speaking. And I made the mistake of ignoring my fan by giving the resistor attention. But I've had the opposite of experience where someone argued with me and I just responded, if that's the thought you want to think, then think that thought. And then easily turned over to the other guy who was my super fan. And at the end of the week, the resistor came up to me and said, you know what? This was the best class I ever had. Now it's all a mind game, but by ignoring the resistor and not feeding his resistance, I was able to influence him. Does that make sense?
Dude, that's so good, man. That's so good. It really is, man. Oh gosh. Oh gosh, man. That's pretty deep. Man,
Yeah.
I'm just gonna adopt all this. I gotta listen to more of your episodes. Like I think I've listened to about half of them. I'm about ready to start listening to more podcasts as I work out and things like that. This is awesome. Let's well, next question. What is the best way to teach people new information?
Okay. So
Which I guess you're kind of
there's
going into
lec
that a little bit, but go ahead and elaborate now.
sure. So I think that there's a big difference and a big misunderstanding, the difference between lecturing and coaching. Um, I think if it, let's say, and you can correct me on this since I'm not a real estate guru. Step one, I got to buy a house, right? There's step one, and then I might have to make some upgrades to the house, right? And then I got to put it on the market and all that. So those are basic concepts. When it comes to how, that is coaching. That's drawing the answer out of somebody. Lecturing is telling somebody 2 + 2 = 4.
Mhm.
But how to do it yourself is coaching. And I think a lot of people want to tell people what to do, but adults don't work that way. Adults need to figure it out for themselves. So coaching is helping them find the answer to their own problems within themselves. So you have a real estate business, right?
Mhm.
But the way your real estate business is structured cannot be exactly the same as anybody else. Everybody's business is going to be slightly different. Maybe you have your wife as your great real estate agent, right? You always
Mhm.
brag about how great she is.
Right.
You may have upcoming entrepreneurs that are a solo act. They don't have the same resources you do. So the exact way that Brandon manages his business cannot be the exact way that somebody else manages their business. Coaching is helping people find their own answers to their own problems.
Mhm.
So instead of telling them you should try this, instead, what have you tried that hasn't worked? What have you not tried yet that might could work? And if I came up to you and said, let me give you some feedback, the first thing that's going to happen in your brain is a fight, flight, or freeze response. If I tell you, let me give you some feedback, that places me in a role of being superior and you inferior. I've already lost you a little bit.
Mhm.
But if I first start with, hey, whatever you're doing over there is awesome, or that idea you just had, that was great. Go further down that road. What I'm doing is trying to get you to think for yourself.
Mm.
And that's a foreign concept today. If you look around the world, everybody is telling you what to think. Okay. Everybody is, whether it's the government, social media, um, politics, everybody is telling us what we should think. Instead, should engage people on how to think for themselves, which is kind of a foreign concept.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It really is. I try to with my coaching clients, I try to get a lot of them to kind of do their own thing. Here's my suggestions, but kind of take it for what it's worth to you kind of mentality. So that's kind of what I
That's
do. I
right.
put a lot in front of them and let them kind of make their own decisions and assumptions. And then we can kind of work through experience at that point, based on my experience. I completely agree with you on that. How prepared should someone be to start their own business?
Yeah, and like I said earlier, aim for B minus work, right? You always start before you're ready. I had a mentor, and he told me, I remember I was tasked with teaching a class I'd never taught before.
Hmm.
And I told him, I said, look, I've never taught this before. And he responded with, you can wing it. And it was such a valuable lesson. He didn't lie to me. He didn't lie to me and say, it's okay, you'll do a good job, because I didn't do a good job. I didn't do a good job teaching a class I'd never taught before. I actually screwed up several times, but every failure was a teacher. It was teaching me what didn't work on the next class I would teach. But I made it through the day. I collected the check from the client and I put it in the account. So I did wing it. And so I think with everything, you should always start before you're ready, because that's what teaches you how to succeed. And if we just accept that failing is part of the process, it's just the necessary step. Bill Gates says something and I'm paraphrasing here. He says, people overestimate what they can accomplish in a short term, but underestimate what they can accomplish in a long term. We live in this society where everybody wants something right now. I want high-speed internet right now. I want to download the show on Netflix right now. But that engages us to think that successful business is right now, and it's not. It's 10 years of hard work, right?
Yeah.
And several failures along the way. So we should go into something expecting it to be painful, a struggle, and hard work. But 10 years later, we're going to look back and go, oh my God, look what I've accomplished.
Hmm.
And the irony is in the hard work of today, it seems like it's taking forever. But in a blink of an eye, your kids are growing up so fast. It's amazing how fast 10 years goes by. How
Right.
long have you been in business, Brandon, now? How many years have you been in business?
17 years.
See, it's a blink of an eye in a
Yeah,
way, isn't it?
absolutely.
So always start before you're ready. Don't expect to be a super success in 3 years, but you can be the greatest at your business in 10.
Right, right. Well, that's exactly what I tell my students. And we can. I'm actually going to record a solo podcast on this, but a lot of
Good.
people want to do the get rich quick, and I'm
Yeah.
always kind of like you said earlier. I say, look, don't get into this business to get rich quick, or any business, whatever. I mean, might I add? So get in a business to serve others, like you said, and then realize that real wealth building techniques and tactics. It takes years of struggles and failures. And then over time, as you get better and better and more better, you'll eventually see your bank account rise. The more people you
That's
help,
right.
the more your bank account's going to rise. I mean, it's just like this universal theme. I mean, the more you sow, the more you get back. So you're going to reap more back than you sowed. So I mean, that's kind of how I apply my lifestyle, and I try to teach that to my clients. And Dude,
You're
dude,
so right.
everything you're saying is so good. Speaking of failures, what has been your biggest failure in business and in public speaking?
Yeah. I'm So it is a concept that some people don't even want to admit or talk about, but anxiety.
Mm.
I've dealt with anxiety a lot throughout my life, and different forms of it.
What are you
And there
anxious
was a
about?
what's that?
What are you anxious about, or what were you anxious
Um,
about?
it was always related to public speaking.
Mm.
At home I wouldn't experience it, but if I was walking in the room to a crowd of 40 people, I would feel anxiety, and to the point that it was the irony was it was probably 15 years into my career. I had reached a point where I was known for what I did. I was known for being good at my job, but at the same time, I was having full blown panic attacks in the room while I was teaching.
Mm.
And you would walk into the room, not just rapid heartbeat, but a feeling like you're actually about to pass out. The lighting was going dark in the room. And it was so bad at one point, I actually thought about just quitting, giving up my career, and getting a new job where I would never have to public speak again.
Mm.
But taking that failure and making it a superpower is one of the great experiences with failure I ever had. What I learned was Anxiety is just a feeling inside of you. The thoughts behind it are either going to make it a bad thing that hurts you or a superpower that serves you. If anxiety is nothing more than an increased heart rate, a feeling of energy coming up in your body, that's like drinking a natural Red Bull that will help you perform well.
Mm.
And the more I learned about researching it, I found out that most great public performers actually suffer from anxiety, but they shift it from something of suffering to a superpower. So now, whenever I walk into a room, I still feel anxiety sometimes, but now I process it as, oh, thanks God, you gave me the Red Bull I need to deliver a great performance. And it's actually helped my energy level and helps me be great at my job.
Yeah.
Am
Yeah.
I blowing your mind a little bit on
Dude,
that or?
it's no, it's great, man. Well, I mean, a little bit, yeah. I mean, it's funny. I had the chance to speak at a mastermind in LA a few months ago, and man, I'm used to speaking a little bit, but I just got so nervous, and then my shirt's like soaked, and they actually recorded the video, and you can see like I got the natural oils right now, but I was just sweating profusely. And I
Right.
was nervous, like I was dropping f bombs, like in every few words in my speech, and that was making me comfortable. So I was trying to
Yeah.
overcome that anxiety, but just by dropping a few f bombs, make myself laugh and make it enticing, to listen to. But dude, yeah, I think I've never heard it explained the way you just explained it, but owning it, and turning it into a superpower. I guess that's kind of what I did. And then, yeah, first and foremost, I want to say thank you for explaining that to me, because that's freaking great. And then, secondly, what's some basic tips and tricks that somebody could use to turn, their anxiety or failure into a superpower? Which I know you kind of went into it, but I want to go a little bit deeper if you don't mind.
Okay, I'm going to answer that, but I'm going to come back to something earlier about the anxiety. It ended up being the greatest gift ever because it started a path for trying to understand my own brain and my own behavior more. And the irony was the anxiety motivated me to study my own brain. And now I teach that concept in classes all the time, and people pay me money to listen to it. So, what was a struggle and a failure became something that generates income and profit. I mean, how about that for an irony where had I left the business and found another job, I would never make that money, right?
Hmm.
So, failure is the teacher. But things that helped me along the way, one was the behavioral model. And there's a lot of people that teach this. Brooke Castillo was the first person that introduced it to me. I also studied David Rock. He explains it well, but it's thought, feeling, action, result. So behavior is always a symptom of something else. My thoughts actually influence the way I feel about things, which influence the actions or behaviors I take and the end result that I actually get in life. So if I start, the one thing I actually have control over is my thought. If I have an automatic thought that is unintentional, like I'm nervous or I'm about to pass out, then what that means is I'm probably going to start sweating, which is going to maybe influence a behavior of stuttering over my words or something like that. And
Hmm.
then I'm going to get a result that my performance wasn't very good, right? But the one thing I can actually do is purposely choose a different thought. And so getting in the habit of purposely choosing thoughts on a regular basis is step one of the skill.
Mm.
So let's say you feel anxiety. You have to purposely choose a new thought like, okay, this is putting me in a state of readiness to deliver a high level performance. This anxiety is going to give me an energy where I will never be perceived as boring. The first step is choosing your own thought. And so, a great practice for that is I'm about to go in the shower with you. Okay. So, if you think about when you're in the shower, just pay attention to yourself into the shower and notice your thoughts. And then notice what you're thinking about in the shower today. And the next time you take a shower, notice if you're thinking similar thoughts. And if you are, that means you're not practicing new thoughts. And so anytime you find yourself thinking similar thoughts that you thought yesterday, purposely make yourself think a new thought.
Okay.
So, just because it's on my mind, think about this. How many times have you heard some commercial telling you we are in uncertain times? Right? Have you heard that statement?
Yeah.
Okay, so the world is telling me that right now I'm in uncertain times, and I might be influenced by that and think, well, this is an uncertain time. Who knows what's going to happen tomorrow? The truth is, every day of life is uncertain times. That there's no such thing as not living in uncertain times. A comet could fly out of the sky and end the human race. We could have another 9/11. We could have another financial crisis. We could have another pandemic. Every day is uncertain times. So if you are willing to challenge the message of the world and choose your own thoughts, here's an example. It's normal for a Democrat Party to say that Republicans just care about big business. And they don't care about the environment. But could I purposely choose a new thought? Because I know all kinds of Republicans that do care about the environment.
Mm-hmm.
I also know several Republicans that believe that there should be a social safety net for people in need. So are you willing to challenge thoughts poured into you and come up with your own? There's step one on getting out of anxiety. I think I went on a ramble there.
It's really good. It's really good. My gosh. All right, guys. So look, everybody download Leader Think on Apple Podcast, and where else is Leader Think podcast? Where you
So I've
podcast?
got it on Apple and Stitcher and iHeartRadio. I think that's the primary ones out there.
Yeah.
And then I have leaderthink.com. Also Phillip Greisen. If you search me up on LinkedIn, there's not many Phillip Greisens on there.
Yeah.
And then I also have ProSafe Solutions is our other website that has anybody interested in the safety compliance side.
Excellent. Everybody, that's where you can find Phillip Greisen. Let's just end this with a few rapid fire questions. And I always go to pop culture because I want to humanize people, and most people can humanize with each other with pop culture because we all grew up around movies and music and books and things like that. So, what is your favorite book that you've read and reread, and why?
The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. Earlier, we were talking about the limbic brain and the prefrontal cortex and those two layers to you. But there's somebody that observes when you're operating on your limbic judgmental brain or your enlightened prefrontal cortex. And the power of now is about that third level. Some people call it the unbiased observer. Some people call it the soul. But it's a part of you that never judges anything, but it's aware of everything your mortal brain is doing. And I'm a Christian, and some Christians look at the book and get a little scared because he does talk about Jesus a lot, all in a positive way, but it's not exactly in tune with modern religion. But it's been one of the most enlightening books I've ever read, The Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle.
Excellent. What is your favorite movie or documentary, and why?
Gladiator. I think that it was Russell Crowe's best performance and also Joaquin Phoenix. But everything lined up perfectly for that movie. The main actors, they delivered great roles, but the music really changed the mood. There's scenes where it's a gory battle, but the music, instead of being loud and intense, goes to a slow, emotional type of feeling. So it's almost like you sympathize with the death instead of the natural attraction to violence we see in movies.
Gotcha, gotcha. Yeah, I love that movie, man. It is so good. What is your guilty pleasure music?
I'm a musician, so I like a lot of different stuff, and I think I like some heavy stuff.
Yep.
But just because it's on my mind, Fiona Apple, "Fetch the Bolt Cutters" came out this past weekend. Every album she does is a masterpiece and seems to top the last one. Um, it's never formula music. Every song on the latest album starts one way and ends completely differently
Yep.
than it started. So there's no verse, chorus, typical structure, and the words are she's a master of what she does. So I've worn that album out all weekend long.
Right, right. All right. Last question. I'm throwing a new question in
Okay,
because I know you used to grow your
I
own
love it.
wine. You used to grow your own wine. So, what is your favorite alcoholic drink of choice, or are you just a water guy now?
I still like whiskey in moderation, okay? But I just like whiskey. I like the taste of it. If they could come out with a unsweet tea that tasted just like whiskey, I would probably drink it all day long.
Awesome, awesome.
A splash of club soda in there.
Well, there you have it.
Uh,
All right, guys. It has been a great pleasure of mine to have my friend Philip on. I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. And we are going to ask one last question. What's some parting
okay.
advice you would give to the audience here?
Pay attention to yourself and the way you think, and purposely try out new thoughts as if they were food at the buffet line and see what they're like. See how they affect your life.
Awesome, awesome. Philip, thank you so much, man. This has been excellent, and I greatly appreciate you taking the time and spending it with me and my audience.